Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. The eyes clinked in Miles Trenton's glass as he took another sip of whiskey, his eyes scanning the crowd of well-dressed guests mingling in his living room. The party was in full swing, laughter and chatter filling the air, but Miles felt oddly detached from it all. His gaze settled on his wife, Lana, who was across the room, charming a group of guests with her radiant smile and animated gestures. Something was off. Miles couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the nagging feeling in his gut had been growing stronger over the past few weeks. Lana's late nights at the office, her hush phone conversations, the growing emotional distance between them, all added up to something he didn't want to face. Earth to Miles. You look like you're about to cross-examine that whiskey glass. A voice cut through his thoughts. Miles turned to see Vanessa Adler, his close friend and fellow lawyer, watching him with a raised eyebrow. He forced a smile, just thinking about work. Vanessa snorted. At your own party? Come on, Miles. What's really going on? Before he could answer, a tall, handsome man with salt and pepper hair approached Lana's group. Miles watched as Braden Huxley, the real estate mogul, inserted himself into the conversation with practiced ease. Lana's eyes lit up, and she laughed at something Braden said, touching his arm lightly. Miles' jaw clenched. He downed the rest of his whiskey in one gulp. I need some air, he muttered to Vanessa, setting down his glass and making his way to the patio. Outside, the cool night air helped clear his head. Miles took a deep breath, trying to push away the suspicions that were eating at him. He was a defense attorney, known for his sharp mind and ability to piece together evidence, but right now he wished he could turn off that part of his brain. Mr. Trenton. A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. Miles turned to see Connor Dade, his private investigator, standing in the shadows. Connor. Miles nodded. What have you got for me? Connor glanced around to make sure they were alone before speaking in a low voice. I've been tracking Mr. Huxley's movements as you requested. He's been seen entering your home on multiple occasions while you were at work. Miles felt his stomach drop, but he kept his face impassive. How many times? At least 5 in the past 2 weeks, Connor replied. Always during your normal office hours. Miles nodded, his mind already racing. Keep digging. I want to know everything. Where they go, what they do, who they talk to. Leave no stone unturned. Connor nodded and melted back into the shadows, leaving Miles alone with his thoughts. He stood there for a long moment, staring out at the manicured lawn, his hands gripping the patio railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he finally turned to go back inside, his face was a mask of calm. But inside, a storm was brewing. The party continued, but now Miles watched the room with new eyes. He noticed the subtle glances between Lana and Braden, the way they seemed to gravitate towards each other, even when speaking to other people. Each observation was another nail in the coffin of his marriage. As the night wore on, Miles found himself at a table with several colleagues, including Vanessa. He was in the middle of a discussion about a recent high-profile case when Braden approached with a smug grin on his face. Quite the party, Trenton, Braden said, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. Your wife certainly knows how to entertain. Miles felt the tension in the air thicken. He looked up at Braden, his face betraying nothing of the rage building inside him. She does indeed, he replied coolly. Braden leaned in, his voice low, but clear enough for those at the table to hear. Your wife will spend a night with me. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to Miles, waiting for his reaction. He could feel Vanessa tense beside him, ready to intervene if necessary. Miles met Braden's gaze, his voice ice cold and deadly serious. You have 30 seconds to leave, or I'll take action. The color drained from Braden's face. He straightened up, his bravado crumbling under Miles' unwavering stare. For a moment, it seemed he might challenge Miles, but self-preservation won out. With a muttered curse, Braden turned and left, pushing his way through the crowd towards the exit. The party quickly began to disperse after that, guests murmuring among themselves about what they had witnessed. Miles remained seated, calmly sipping his drink as if nothing had happened. Vanessa leaned in close. "Miles, what was that about?" "Just taking out the trash," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. As the last of the guests filed out, Miles found himself alone in the living room with Lana. She stood by the fireplace, wringing her hands nervously. "Miles, I can explain," she began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Save it, Lana. I know everything." Lana's face crumbled. "Please, Miles, it was a mistake. I never meant to." "To what?" Miles interrupted, his voice sharp. "To deceive another man in our bed. To lie to my face for weeks. To make a fool of me in front of our friends and colleagues." Tears streamed down Lana's face. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk about this? Can we try to work it out?" Miles studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and controlled. "You'll get exactly what you deserve, Lana. But don't think for a second that I'll forgive you." Fear crept into Lana's eyes as she realized the full weight of what she had done. "What? What are you going to do?" Miles turned away from her, walking towards a study. "You'll see," he said over his shoulder, leaving Lana alone in the empty room. In his study, Miles poured himself another whiskey and lit a cigar. He sat in his leather chair, staring at the wall as he puffed on the cigar, his mind racing. Lana's betrayal wasn't something he could forgive, and he had no intention of letting her or Braden walk away unscathed. He picked up his phone and dialed Connor's number. "Connor," he said when the investigator answered, "I need you to dig deeper into Braden Huxley's life. Business dealings, financial records, personal relationships, everything. There's more to this than just the affair, and I intend to find out what it is." "Understood, Mr. Trenton," Connor replied. "I'll get right on it." Miles hung up and leaned back in his chair, blowing a plume of cigar smoke towards the ceiling. The wheels were already turning in his head, plans forming and taking shape. Lana and Braden had no idea what was coming for them. As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the study window, Miles stood and straightened his tie. He had work to do, and he would make sure that both Lana and Braden regretted the day they decided to cross him. Miles Trenton didn't believe in forgiveness. He believed in something just as cold, calculated, and merciless, and he was about to show them exactly what that meant. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Miles Trenton's downtown office, casting long shadows across his desk. He sat back in his chair, fingers steepled as he listened to the man across from him. "Braden Huxley is a snake," Zane called, his face twisted with disgust. "He's been undercutting my deals for years, but I've never been able to prove he's doing anything illegal." Miles leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And now?" Zane grinned, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "Now I got something. My inside source has been feeding me information for months. Cooked books, bribed officials, the works." Miles flipped through the documents, his mind already racing with possibilities. He looked up at Zane. "Who's your source?" "Tessa Monroe," Zane replied. "Rising star in Braden's company. She's been itching to take him down from the inside." Miles nodded, a plan already forming. "I'll need to speak with her directly. Set up a meeting somewhere discreet." As Zane left, Miles picked up his phone. "Connor, I need you to verify some information for me and keep digging into Braden's personal life. I want to know every skeleton in this closet." The next day, Miles met Tessa Monroe in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. She was younger than he expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Trenton," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "I hope you understand the risk I'm taking by meeting you." Miles nodded, his voice low. "I do, Ms. Monroe. And I assure you, it won't be in vain. Tell me everything you know about Braden's operations." For the next hour, Tessa laid out a complex web of fraud and embezzlement. Miles listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally. "Why turn on Braden now?" Tessa's eyes hardened. "Because he's a predator. He uses people, discards them, and thinks he's untouchable. It's time someone showed him he's not." Miles smiled grimly. "On that, Ms. Monroe, we are in complete agreement." Over the next few weeks, Miles worked tirelessly, building a case against Braden. He coordinated with Zane and Tessa, gathering evidence and lining up witnesses. All the while, he maintained a facade of normalcy at home with Lana. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Lana broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "Miles," she said hesitantly, "I know things have been difficult between us, but I was hoping we could talk about moving forward, about reconciling." Miles looked at her, his face a mask of calm. "Of course, Lana, I've been doing a lot of thinking too." Hope flickered in Lana's eyes. "You have?" Miles nodded, taking a sip of his wine. "I have. And I think we need to take things slow, rebuild trust." Lana reached across the table, grasping his hand. "Yes, absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes, Miles. I promise." As Lana squeezed his hand, Miles felt nothing but cold determination. He smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that, Lana. Very glad indeed." The next day, Miles put the next phase of his plan into motion. He called in favors, spread carefully crafted rumors, and made sure that whispers of Lana's affair reached the right ears. Within days, Lana's phone began ringing less frequently. Clients canceled appointments, citing vague excuses. Her social circle, once vibrant and active, began to shrink. "I don't understand," Lana said one evening, frustration evident in her voice. "It's like everyone's avoiding me. Even the Hendersons canceled their anniversary party booking." Miles feigned concern. "That's strange. Maybe it's just a slow period. I'm sure things will pick up soon." But things didn't pick up. As the weeks passed, Lana's business continued to suffer. Miles watched as she grew more desperate, making frantic calls and sending pleading emails. One night, he overheard her on the phone with Braden. "Please, Braden," she begged, her voice trembling. "I need your help. My business is falling apart, and I don't know what to do." There was a pause. "But I thought we had something special." As she hung up, sobbing, Miles retreated to a study. He poured himself a whiskey and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The pieces were falling into place. The next morning, Miles received a call from Connor. "Mr. Trenton," Connor said, excitement evident in his voice. "I've got something big. Braden's been embezzling funds from his own company. Millions of dollars siphoned off into offshore accounts." Miles gripped tightly. "Excellent work, Connor. Send me everything you've got. It's time to move." With the final piece of evidence in hand, Miles set his plan in motion. He filed a lawsuit against Braden Huxley on behalf of several former clients, alleging fraud and embezzlement. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Miles stood before the judge, his voice clear and confident as he laid out the case against Braden. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence will show that Mr. Huxley has engaged in a systematic pattern of fraud, deceiving not only his clients but his own employees and business partners." As witness after witness took the stand, Braden's face grew increasingly pale. Tessa Monroe's testimony was particularly damning, providing insider details of Braden's illegal activities. During cross-examination, Miles went for the kill. "Mr. Huxley," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "can you explain the discrepancies in your company's financial records? Specifically, the millions of dollars that seem to have vanished into thin air?" Braden stuttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is all a misunderstanding." Miles approached the witness stand, holding up a stack of documents. "A misunderstanding. These bank records show transfers to offshore accounts in your name. Are you saying these are forgeries, Mr. Huxley? The courtroom fell silent as Braden's lawyer frantically whispered in his ear. Finally, Braden slumped in defeat. No, he mumbled. They're not forgeries. As the judge ordered Braden's assets frozen, pending further investigation, Miles caught Zane's eye in the gallery. The businessman gave him a subtle nod of approval. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Miles. Mr. Trenton, one called out, how does it feel to bring down one of the city's most prominent businessmen? Miles faced the cameras, his expression serious. This isn't about bringing anyone down. It's about justice. No one is above the law, no matter how wealthy or well-connected they may be. As the reporters clamored for more, Miles spotted Lana standing at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of shock and fear. He walked past her without a word, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. That evening, Miles sat in his study, savoring a glass of scotch. His phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Braden tried to flee, arrested at the airport. Miles allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. Braden Huxley was finished. But he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Lana found divorce papers waiting for her on the kitchen table. Miles watched him passively as she read through them, her hands shaking. Miles, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Please don't do this. We can work this out. I'll do anything. Miles met her gaze, his eyes cold. It's too late for that, Lana. You made your choice. As Lana broke down sobbing, Miles walked out of the house, closing the door firmly behind him. He had a meeting with Zane to discuss the future of Braden's now defunct company. The wheels of justice and revenge continued to turn, and Miles Trenton was the one controlling them. There would be no forgiveness, only consequences. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of Braden Huxley's mansion. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze as federal agents swarmed the property, boxes of evidence in their arms. Miles Trenton stood across the street, watching the scene unfold with cold satisfaction. His phone buzzed. It was Connor. Mr. Trenton. Connor's voice crackled through the speaker. Braden Huxley is in custody. They caught him at Lax, trying to board a private jet to Mexico. Miles allowed himself a small smile. Excellent work, Connor. Keep me posted on any developments. As he hung up, a black SUV pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, revealing Zane Caldwell's grim face. Quite a spectacle, Zane remarked, nodding towards the mansion. Miles turned to face him. Indeed, I trust everything is proceeding as planned on your end. Zane's lips curled into a predatory grin. Oh yes, my team is already moving into what's left of Huxley's empire. By this time next week, it'll all be mine. In Tessa Monroe's office, Miles asked, raising an eyebrow, getting a well-deserved promotion. Zane replied, she'll be heading up our new acquisitions department, a reward for her loyalty. Miles nodded approvingly. Good. She took a significant risk. It's only fair she reaps the benefits. As Zane's car pulled away, Miles took one last look at the crumbling remains of Braden Huxley's life. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time for the final act. Across town in a small, dingy apartment, Lana Trenton sat on a threadbare couch, staring blankly at the TV. The news was filled with reports of Braden's arrest and the collapse of his business empire. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a courier holding an envelope. Lana Trenton, the courier asked. She nodded, taking the envelope with trembling hands. As soon as the door closed, she tore it open. Inside were divorce papers, every line already filled out in Miles' precise handwriting. All that was missing was her signature. Lana sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She reached for her phone, dialing Miles' number with shaking fingers. Miles answered on the third ring. Yes. Miles, please. Lana sobbed. Can we talk? Face to face. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. We can work this out, can't we? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Miles spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "All right. Meet me at Griffith Observatory in an hour." An hour later, Lena stood at the observatory's railing, looking out over the sprawling city of Los Angeles. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Miles approaching, his face impassive. "Miles," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." He stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Lana took a deep breath. "I know what I did was unforgivable. But Miles, we've been together for so long. We built a life together. Can't we try to salvage something from this?" Miles turned to face her, his eyes cold. "Salvage what, Lana? The trust you shattered, the vows you broke. Tell me, what exactly is left to save?" "Our love," Lana pleaded, reaching for his hand. Miles pulled away. "Love," he scoffed, "doesn't betray. Love doesn't lie. What you're feeling now, Lana, isn't love. It's fear. Fear of facing the consequences of your actions." Lana's face crumpled. "Miles, please. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I can do to make this right." Miles stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen. "You want to make this right," he said, holding out the pen. "Sign the divorce papers. Walk away. That's the only thing you can do now." Lana stared at the pen, then back at Miles' face, searching for any sign of the man she once knew. Finding none, she slowly took the pen from his hand. "Is this really what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Miles' reply was swift and final. "It's what you chose, Lana. The moment you decided to betray everything we built together." With a shaking hand, Lana signed the papers. As she handed them back to Miles, a part of her still hoped for a last-minute reprieve, a sign that all was not lost. But Miles simply tucked the papers back into his jacket. "Goodbye, Lana," he said, turning to walk away. "Miles," Lana called out, desperation in her voice, "will you ever forgive me?" Miles paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Some things, Lana, are unforgivable. This is one of them." And with that, he walked away, leaving Lana alone with the consequences of her actions. The next morning, Miles sat in his new office, now a partner in Zane Caldwell's expanding business empire. He looked out over the city, a city that had seen the rise and fall of Braden Huxley, the unraveling of his own marriage, and the execution of a plan months in the making. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Vanessa. "Hey," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "How are you holding up?" Miles gestured for her to come in. "I'm fine, Vanessa. Why wouldn't I be?" Vanessa sat across from him, concern etched on her face. "Miles, you just took down one of the city's most powerful men and divorced your wife of 15 years. It's okay to not be fine," Vanessa replied gently. Miles leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of calm. "What's done is done. Braden and Lana made their choices. I simply ensured they faced the consequences." "What consequences are you facing, Miles?" Vanessa pressed. For a moment, a flicker of emotion crossed Miles' face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I faced my consequences the moment I discovered their betrayal. Everything since then has been about justice." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Just don't lose yourself in this, Miles. Revenge has a way of hollowing a person out." Miles smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Vanessa, but I know exactly who I am and what I'm doing." As Vanessa left, Miles turned back to the window. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was a new era, both for the city and for Miles Trenton. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Trenton, I have information you might find interesting regarding a certain judge who's been taking bribes." Interested, Miles stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across his face. He typed out a reply. "Always." He set the phone down and reached for a cigar. As he lit it, savoring the rich aroma, Miles reflected on the path that had led him here. The betrayal, the pain, the calculated execution of his revenge. He felt no regret, no remorse, only a sense of grim satisfaction. In this city of angels, Miles Trenton had become something else entirely, a force of reckoning, dispensing his own brand of justice. And he was just getting started. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the city into twilight. But for Miles, a new day was dawning. A day without forgiveness, without mercy. A day where every action had its consequence, and he would be the one to ensure they were paid in full. He picked up his phone again, dialing Connor's number. "Connor, I've got a new job for you. Let's meet." As he hung up, Miles took one last look at the darkening sky. In this game of power and retribution, he had emerged victorious, and he intended to stay that way, no matter the cost. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.